Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. This week, our subject is Catherine Howard. Catherine was born in Lambeth in or about 1523. Although the exact date is unknown, an estimated date has been determined from the wills of family members. The known birth order of her and her siblings in various dated records, and the age range of her ladies in waiting, being in the same age group and often the same passhold of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, where Catherine would spend a large portion of her childhood and adolescence. Unfortunately for Catherine, she did not begin with a good start in life. This was mostly caused by routinely poor decision making of her father, Edmund Howard. Being the third son of a prominent family, his opportunities were limited to the generosity of his wealthier family members and his own ability to pave his way. Sadly, he was both overly prideful and a spendthrift. Edmund developed a gambling addiction that would threaten him with debtor's prison, and on multiple occasions he would go into hiding. In his desperate 1527 letter to Wolsey, he states, "I humbly beseech your grace to be my good lord, for without your gracious help I am utterly undone. Sir, so it is that I am so far in danger of the king's laws by reason of the debt that I am in, that I dare not go abroad, nor come in mine own house, and am fain to absent me from my wife and my poor children. So there is no help but through your grace and your good mediation to the king's grace." If Cardinal Wolsey did assist the family in response to the letter written in 1527, which there is little evidence of, the funds arrived piecemeal and were probably not enough. If he helped, it was only a little help. It wasn't enough to cover everything. The lowest point for the family came between 1524 and 1531, which roughly corresponds with Catherine Howard's birth and early years. The image all of this paints is of a girl likely neglected and potentially unwanted, as her birth meant a future dowry to come up with money for. Generally, her young life was filled with uncertainty and instability. As such, it is more understandable as to why she has often been described as barely literate and generally unlearned. She clearly was not a high priority to her father, nor was her education or future prospects. In 1531, help came to Catherine indirectly through the intervention of her cousin and soon to be queen, Anne Boleyn, whom Edmund had approached regarding a position. He was assigned to be the comptroller at Calais. If you don't know the definition of comptroller, this is it. A comptroller is a management level position responsible for supervising the quality of accounting and financial reporting of an organization. A financial comptroller is a senior level executive who acts as the head of accounting and oversees the preparation of financial reports, such as balance sheets and income statements. Maybe not the best job for a gambling addict, so mistakes were made. Whether due to her mother Joyce's death in about 1528, her family's financial problems, which were huge, or Catherine nearing the age suitable for wardship, Catherine's family was broken up in 1531 when she was about 8 years of age. Two of her older half sisters were married off, and both Catherine and her brother Henry were sent to be wards of their step grandmother and the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, Agnes Howard, the stepmother of their father Edmund. The Duchess managed large household at Chesworth House in Horsham, Sussex, and at Norfolk House in Lambeth, where dozens of attendants, along with her many wards, usually the children of aristocratic but poor relatives, resided. While sending young children to be educated and trained in aristocratic households was common among European nobles of the time, supervision at both Chesworth House and Lambeth were apparently lax. The Dowager Duchess was often at court and seems to have had little direct involvement in the upbringing of her wards and young female attendants. It was a discount finishing school, and they were getting what they weren't paying for. Catherine was the highest ranking girl at her boarding school and was kind of the ringleader of her friends. When her step grandmother was often away at court, she snuck special food from the kitchen and wine and men into the girls' dormitory. In the Duchess household at Horsham, in around 1536, Catherine began music lessons with two teachers, one of whom was Henry Manox, and they began a relationship. Manox's exact age at the time is unknown. It has been recently stated that he was in his late 30s, perhaps 36, but that's not supported by Catherine's biographers. Evidence exists that Maddox was not yet married, and that would have been highly unusual for someone of his background at the time not to be married by his mid 30s. He married sometime in the late 1530s, perhaps in 1539, and there's also some evidence that he was the same age as the other two men serving in the household, including his cousin, Edward Waldegrave, who was in his late teens or early 20s between 1536 and 1538. This evidence indicates that Manox, too, was in his early to mid 20s in 1536. My best guess is that he would be around 23, give or take a few years. But Catherine was his 13-year-old student. The details and dates of this relationship are debated between modern historians. The most popular theory is that the relationship between them was abusive, with Manox grooming and preying on Catherine between 1536 and 1538. Some believe Manox's interactions with Catherine took place over a much shorter time, that Manox was roughly the same age as her, but that their relationship was nonetheless inappropriate on several levels. He believes that Catherine was increasingly repulsed by Manox's pressure to have sex with her, and was angered by his gossiping with servants about the details of what had gone on between them. Keep in mind that Catherine would have been about 13 when this relationship started. Manox was about 23. In the 16th century, this would have been considered legal from the standpoint of age. We know now that 12-year-olds aren't old enough to get married, but that was just how old girls had to be to marry. Just based on age alone, though, I think the relationship was inherently abusive. Manox may not have known, but he was clearly the aggressor in the relationship with a very young girl, and he was her music teacher. Manox and Catherine both confessed during her adultery inquisition as the wife of King Henry VIII that they had engaged in sexual contact, but not actual coitus. When questioned, Catherine was quoted as saying, "At the flattering and fair persuasions of Manox, being but a young girl, I suffered him at sundry times to handle and touch the secret parts of my body, which neither became me with honesty to permit him nor to require." Catherine severed contact with Manox in 1538, most likely in the spring, because her grandmother found out. She yelled at Manox and slapped Catherine. I think she probably could have handled that better. Shortly afterward, Catherine was persuaded by Francis Durham, the sexy secretary of the Dowager Duchess, if you've seen Six. Catherine was 15 by now, and Durham was around 30. They allegedly became lovers, addressing each other as husband and wife. Durham also entrusted Catherine with various wifely duties, such as keeping his money when he was away on business. Catherine and the other young ladies of the household were locked in at night, so not so fire safe. Catherine, being diligent, stole a key to the room because safety first, and men. She used the key to sneak men in after hours. Because of this, many of Catherine's roommates among the Dowager Duchess's maids of honor and attendants knew of the relationship, which apparently ended in 1539 when the Dowager Duchess again found out. Again yelling at Durham and slapping Catherine. Again, mistakes were made. Despite this, Catherine and Durham may have parted with intentions to marry upon his return from Ireland, agreeing to a pre-contract of marriage. If indeed they exchanged vows before having sexual intercourse, they would have been considered married in the eyes of the church. Catherine's uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, found her a place at court in the household of the king's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. She was getting into trouble at the Dowager Duchess's home. The king had a history of being interested in his wives' ladies in waiting. The Duke of Norfolk had already been the uncle of a queen, Anne Boleyn. Maybe he could be that again, only this time with a younger, less powerful niece who he could control. As a young and attractive lady in waiting, Catherine quickly caught the eye of multiple men, including the king and Thomas Culpeper. In the early stages of her time at court, and prior to the arrival of Anne of Cleves, the relationship between the king and Catherine has been little remarked upon. He seems to have found her attractive, and whenever it so happened that they intersected, so as to be in each other's company, they publicly flirted. But little else appears to have happened. As Anne arrived, and the king came to show little interest in her, this is where the opportunity for Catherine slowly began to present itself. Prior to this point, Catherine and Thomas Culpeper had slowly entered into a quasi-relationship, and one that was not sexual. Although from later testimony, Culpeper expected it soon to become so. Also telling Catherine that he loved her, likely more lust than actual love. Catherine rejected this, and in response, he moved on to another woman within the queen's household. This deeply upset Catherine, who does appear to have had some level of feelings for him at the time, as she broke down in tears on one occasion in front of one of her fellow maids of honor. What you have to know about Catherine is that her unstable childhood and insecurity had developed as anxiety. She was charming and popular, usually, but had occasional panic attacks when things didn't go as expected. She didn't have a lot of experience with men outside her two fairly unhealthy relationships. She wasn't used to men taking no from her as a no. Culpeper had taken her no as a no and moved on, and Catherine didn't take it well. During this time, word reached back to Francis Durham of the rumored soon to be marriage between the pair, and he arrived at court to dispute this with them both. He claimed they had made a contract to be married. After being again told off by Catherine, he returned to the Dowager Duchess's household, which he requested to leave, being Catherine was no longer there. Believing this desperation was temporary and soon to be over, Agnes Howard denied this request. The king had displayed little interest in his new wife Anne from the beginning, with Thomas Cromwell trying to find a way out of this unhappy marriage. Norfolk saw an opportunity. The Howards may have thought that they could recreate the influence gained during Anne Boleyn's reign as queen consort. According to Nicholas Sander, the religiously conservative Howard family may have seen Catherine as a figurehead for their fight by express determination to restore the Roman Catholic Church to England, even though it was this same man's other niece who had been the reason the king left the church in the first place. Just as she had been at boarding school, she was very popular at court. As the king's interest in Catherine grew, so did the House of Norfolk's influence at court. Catherine seemed to have liked the security the king could give her, something she had not experienced before. He was nearing 50. He had gained so much weight that his waist was now 50 inches. 50. He had diabetes. He had an often infected open wound on his leg. Her youth, beauty, and vivacity were captivating for the middle-aged sovereign, who claimed that he had never known the like to any woman. Within months of her arrival at court, Henry bestowed gifts of land and expensive cloth upon Catherine. Henry called her his very jewel of womanhood, Word on the street was that he called her his rose without a thorn, but that is likely a myth. The French ambassador, Charles de Marillac, thought her delightful. Holbein's portrait shows a young auburn-haired girl with a characteristically hooked Howard nose. Catherine was said to have a gentle, earnest face. King Henry and Catherine were married by Bishop Bonner of London at Oatlands Palace on the 28th of July, 1540, the same day that Cromwell was executed. So that was a bit of a message. She was a teenager, and he was 49. Catherine adopted the French motto that in English meant, no other will but his. So that kind of says it all. The marriage was made public on the 8th of August, and prayers were said in the chapel royal at Hampton Court Palace. Henry indulged her every whim. Catherine was young, joyous, and carefree. She was too young to take part in administrative matters of state. Nevertheless, every night, Sir Thomas Heneage, groom of the stool, came to her chamber to report on the king's well-being. No plans were made for a coronation, yet she still traveled downriver on the royal barge into the city of London to a gun salute and some acclamation. She was settled by jointure at Baynard's Castle. Little changed at court, other than the arrival of many Howards. Every day she dressed with new clothes in the French fashion, bedecked with precious jewels, decorated in gold around her sleeves. Sugar daddy, that's the vibe. The king didn't seem to remember how to behave in public. It was noted that he kept pawing at his new wife, more so than he had done before. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at longlivethequeenpodcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share with a friend. If you hated it, share with an enemy. I'm not picky. Long live to all the queens out there, and until next week, bye.